Hello, Internet, and welcome back. 2019 is here, and so is the new Mark V Toyota Supra. So, let me first kick this episode off with something of a disclaimer, as most of my videos simply involve me reporting on current news and rumors and throwing a little bit of opinion in, but this one's going to be sort of the inverse of that, as I have what's considered to be some pretty polarizing thoughts on the A90 Supra, and I have for some time, but I'm not the only one. Anyway, I also have some constructive criticism to go along with it, and I decided I wanted to wait until the official release just in case Toyota had any pleasant surprises to go along with it. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and actually, in hindsight, I could have made this video a few months ago and virtually everything would have been accurate. So, let's talk briefly about the previous car, as I'm sure most of you know the basics if you're watching this video, but it was known as the Mark IV, or the A80 Supra, and it was sold in the US from 1993 until 1998, though the car actually continued in Japan until 2002. But in that short period of time, it became one of, if not the most famous Toyotas ever sold in North America. And that's not because of how aggressive the styling was, or even because of how much horsepower it came with, though 300 horsepower wasn't bad for a 90s car, and it had contemporaries like the 300ZX or the 3000 GT. They're actually better in some aspects, but the reason for the Supra's popularity over the competition was because you got a simplistic, solid manual transmission, and you got a more or less bulletproof 2JZ engine which could handle virtually as much horsepower as you could run through it. So essentially a perfect blank slate where all of your tuner or gearhead dreams could come true. So, fast forward a decade or two, and we now have people who were fans of the cars back in the 1990s, plus an entire generation of now grown car enthusiasts who spent the better part of a decade watching things like Fast and the Furious and YouTube channels like 1320 Videos, Rob Ferretti, and many others. Then, in the last few years, it seemed like Toyota was actually warming up to the idea, as you might imagine any business would that had a growing number of enthusiasts begging for a product that only you could provide them with. Then, 2013 rolled around and Toyota and BMW announced a joint venture. 1 year later, at the 2014 Detroit Auto Show, we got the Toyota FT1 concept, and people started to get excited. And I admit I was one of them. One of the first official things we learned was that the new Supra would share a body co-developed with BMW to reduce development costs and make the car more profitable for Toyota to produce. And I believe the majority of people would have been fine with that fact alone. The only similarities were that the two cars shared a similar wheelbase and chassis layout, and after a certain point, the two companies parted ways and developed cars that were completely theirs. No one would have batted an eye. But in August of last year, we got our first look at the BMW Z4, and even then, Toyota assured us that the new car would be unique, while not disclosing just how similar the two cars would be. Fast forward to Detroit, Michigan on the 14th of this month, and over 12 years after Toyota first teased that they would bring back the Supra, we got our first official reveal along with the long-awaited specs and performance numbers, and the worst fears of most enthusiasts were confirmed in that it was essentially that the legendary Supra had been given the FRS/86 treatment. Only this time, instead of being a Subaru, it's a BMW. So, speaking of BMW, let's compare the two companies, which really couldn't be more diametrically opposed, and both of which I'm actually a fan of, but for very different reasons. Outside of being car companies, they really couldn't be any different, in that Toyota has made its mark by building cars that on the surface might seem kind of bland or underpowered, but are also known for building reliable, gas-efficient, daily drivers that in most circumstances will go hundreds of thousands of miles without needing any major maintenance. And is literally the world standard when it comes to quality. And yes, unlike some other people out there who also qualify as millennials, I know the appropriate use of the word literally. Anyway, then on the other end of the spectrum, you have BMW, which makes complex, expensive, performance-oriented cars that really are some of the best looking cars on the road overall, but are far from being known for their lasting quality, low maintenance, or ability to retain their value. And if you don't believe me on that, just go look and see what happens to the price of a 7 Series once it leaves the lot. Which is fine for the market that BMW targets, as it relies heavily on leases, and most of their new buyers aren't as worried about the possibility of things like expensive maintenance costs. So what do I mean by a rebadge? Well, you get an Austrian-built car that came from a BMW plant that sits on a BMW chassis, powered by a BMW engine, along with a single option for a BMW transmission. Oh, and the brakes and the suspension are the same as well. But wait, the savings don't end there, as Toyota couldn't even be bothered to add their own software to the most anticipated car they've produced in the last decade. That's right, sit down, crank her up, and you'll be greeted by BMW's iDrive system. You even get the same shifter. On top of that, the whole rest of the interior is basically a reskin of the Z4. In fact, let's talk about that, as virtually the only Toyota built things on this car are the body and the interior panels. I think they may have tuned the car themselves, but however, that's not exactly a good thing, as it actually has about 50 less horsepower than the Z4, which has the same engine. As far as styling goes, I mean, it's okay for a $50,000 car. I personally think the profile view looks pretty good, but you kind of lose me at the overstyling on the front and the back. I mean, and it's a matter of personal opinion, but I feel like they're trying a little too hard. It's almost like Toyota hired the dev team that made the Civic Type R. And actually, to go along with that, you also get some non-functional vents just to show how sporty it is, just like the Civic Type R. Anyway, let's talk about platform sharing, as it's bad enough when companies do this in-house, like how they used to with the older Camaro and the Firebird, and people see through what you're doing, but they accept it. However, I feel like it's way more egregious when it happens between supposed competitors. Really, like, imagine next week there's some big announcement. Ford comes out and basically says, hey everyone, to save costs, we're going to get General Motors to develop the next-gen Mustang for us. It's going to share a platform with the Camaro. It'll have a 6.2-liter LT1. It's going to have 50 less horsepower, though, and you'll only have an option for an automatic transmission. But don't worry, guys. We're going to tune it, and we're going to build the body panels. Oh, and we're also going to save a boatload of money in the process over developing the thing ourselves. And, I mean, think about it. What kind of reaction do you think they would get? And, you know, they may have a little bit more room to get away with stuff like this if they were co-developing some sort of compact hybrid or mid-size crossover that people don't really feel strongly about. But people don't spend $50K on an impractical two-seater just because they need to get around. Sports cars are built to compete with other sports cars, so build your own. And with that, let me just say I'm not here to Toyota bash. I love Toyota. Actually, one of my cars is a Toyota. I've had it for years. It's great. And by the way, I also wouldn't be criticizing them if I were totally indifferent. Like, you'll never see me make a dedicated video on where I opine about how the latest Mitsubishi Outlander just didn't achieve the level of greatness that the public expected out of it. Sorry, Mitsubishi. So, just to be clear, the new Supra comes with BMW's B58 turbocharged 3.0-liter inline-six, making 335 horsepower and 365 pound-feet of torque. It's got a 4.1-second 0 to 60 time and costs an absolute minimum of $50,800. And to be fair to the new Supra, it is priced about $15,000 less than the new Z4, which I guess it's nice that it's not priced closer to $70,000. But anyway, let's compare that roughly $51,000 price to a few other cars that are on sale right now, shall we? So, I've noticed since the car's release, they like to compare it to the Porsche 718 Cayman, which seems like a very different vehicle from a Toyota Supra, but hey, when you compare it to the new Cayman, it does stack up pretty well, as the Cayman comes with a base 2.0-liter, making 300 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque, and starts at $56,000. But now let's step away from comparing it to a mid-engine German four-cylinder and compare it with an actual JDM car. Let's say the 2018 Nissan 370Z, which has a 3.7-liter engine, produces 332 horsepower. Okay, so that's 3 less horses, 95 less pound-feet. However, the 370Z starts at 29.9, so comparable horsepower, rear-wheel drive, manual transmission, $21,000 cheaper. Okay, all right, let's take it up a notch. The 2018 Ford Mustang GT serves up 460 horsepower, 420 pound-feet of torque, and a 3.9-second 0 to 60 time, for a price tag of just over $35,000. And I'm not the world's biggest fan of Mustangs, but at $35K, that really hits a sweet spot between price and performance. Just gotta say that. Unfortunately, it looks like we're still about $15,000 short of the price of a new Supra, so let's compare that to a 2019 Corvette Stingray. Brand new, costs about $54,000, so about $3,000 more. And maybe it's not apples to apples, but it really is the most similarly priced new sports car in North America that I'm aware of. So you get 455 horsepower, 460 pound-feet of torque, a sub 3-second 0 to 60 time. So yeah, it's $3,000 more, and you get an extra 120 horsepower, almost an extra 100 pound-feet of torque on a lighter platform with a much better power-to-weight ratio, more displacement, 4 different transmission options. The car's lower, wider, sports bigger tires. Oh, and the vents are functional as well. Just saying. So, what could they have done to prevent this? Well, I tend to lurk a lot of forums, and plus I have a few ideas of my own. So, for starters, if it were up to me, which it never would be, I would just have done what Toyota has always done with all the previous Supras and built the car from the ground up at Toyota, powered by some new cast iron straight six, a 3JZ if you will, along with a manual transmission, and then work out from there with all the aspirations of 4 cylinders and hybrids and whatever else. But, okay, Toyota currently doesn't make an inline 6, and they wanted to save some money on the development, so take that into account, and we could go with option number 2, which isn't what I would call perfect, but I personally think it would have been better received than what we got. And that would be that Toyota has a wonderful car in the Lexus LC. I would have started with that architecture, dummied down some of the tech and the high-end options, and take out all the origami master leather stitching and whatnot, and bring the price down, and maybe some of the weight as well. This would also coincidentally lower the total price spent on producing the LC, which would also save them some money, but that's not what we're here for. Okay, so that would be a body. What about the engine? Well, admittedly, that one's not as easy, as the 2JZ is forever gone from this world, but from there they could have spent a minimal amount of money and simply added 2 cylinders to the current inline 4, which might not be so bad. But if you wanted to go even cheaper and spend virtually zero on R&D, Toyota actually has a solid 24-valve 3.5-liter V6 that makes more horsepower than what's in the A90 Supra. An engine that's also good enough for cars like the Lexus LC, the Lotus Evora, or the Toyota Mark X. You could then, once again, take a good old Toyota manual 6-speed gearbox and have sold that to the masses for $50,000 a pop, and you probably would have spent just as much money. And no, you can't run 1,200 horsepower or what have you through one of those 2 options, but guess what? You can't run 1,200 horsepower through a Z4 engine either. And at least then you'd have a $50,000 Toyota with 300 horsepower. Or, check it out. Easiest and cheapest idea yet. Just make the exact same car you gave us, except call it something else. Call it the FT1, or call it the Soarer, or maybe some entirely new name, and just say it's the spiritual successor to the Supra. And once again, enthusiasts might not be thrilled, but they wouldn't be as mad. Also, sidebar. I was thinking as I was going through all this, and asked this because I don't want to be one of those, hey, like, share, subscribe, hit that bell people. But if you agree that there's at least some issues with this car, and that constructive criticism may be helpful for Toyota in the future, do me a favor and throw a like on this video, as I'm sure the people that dislike it won't hesitate to either. Thank you. Anyway, so another question is, what position does this leave the Toyota 86 in? Especially if they're going to bring a 4-cylinder version of the Supra over from Japan. And, I mean, I have no problem with there being an abundance of sports cars out there, but what sense does it make from a business standpoint to have 2 similarly sized 4-cylinder sports cars in the lineup? By the way, both of which are rebadged vehicles developed by other car companies, and one costs almost double the price of the other. And there's even some talk about them bringing back the Toyota MR2, which normally would really excite me, but if this is how it's going to be, I'm not sure how I'd feel about them possibly defiling its memory by bringing it back as a rebadged 2nd-generation Mitsubishi iMEV or something. We'll just see. Anyway, at the end of the day, I feel like the issue is that Toyota is simply attempting to sell a car, while missing the whole point of what enthusiasts of the car actually wanted. People don't want a Supra on sale on the market just so Toyota will have a vehicle called the Supra on sale in the lineup. They want a relatively simple, Toyota-built JDM vehicle with a straight 6, a manual transmission, power going to the rear wheels, and the ability to add a little extra horsepower to it. And it would also look good for Toyota, as that way you could set the standard that Toyota is known for making gas-efficient, reliable daily drivers, or they're a place you can come if you're looking for a badass sports car that you can cram 1,000 horsepower into. And I do acknowledge the need for businesses to save costs. I'm not saying that the car won't sell. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the BMW Z4, mainly because it's built by BMW parts in a BMW factory and drives around marked as a BMW Z4, and it's actually an improvement over the car that preceded it. I'm just saying that Toyota didn't give people the car they wanted, and they basically knew the whole time that they weren't going to, which is sad because it seems like they just as easily could have. Or they could have just came out and said that back in 2014, and it wouldn't have been such a letdown for the enthusiasts. But I'll probably end up getting a kick out of it when someone out there Frankensteins themselves together a super convertible out of an old Z4, or when that inevitable 2JZ swap gets out there. But until then, thanks everyone. That's my opinion. Feel free to leave me yours in the comments, and keep it tuned in here for more. I'm out.